Check 1, 2. Hello everyone, just checking the audio, 1, 2, 3. Hello everyone, just checking the audio, 1, 2, 3.
Test.
Hello everyone, just checking the audio, 1, 2, 3.
Test. Well, hello, Katie, and welcome. Hope you're feeling okay tonight. We know you've been fighting a little bit of an illness, but we're really pleased to have you here. Mike Katie, Superintendent of the Milwaukee School District, we're really happy to have you doing this presentation tonight. And we have this both with a small but mighty audience here in our auditorium, but also it is streaming live on our YouTube channel as well. So hopefully we have a lot of parents, community members tuning in at home to get this important information. So really excited to have Katie be presenting tonight. The title of her presentation, following our review of Childhood 2.0 that we did last month, and hopefully most, if not all, were able to view that. I thought that was very powerful. The presentation tonight of how to reach, teach, and support our iGeneration youth. So welcome, Katie, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry I couldn't make it in person, but I didn't want to infect you with any of my germs. My name is Katie McPherson, and I was in your community a few weeks ago, as your superintendent said. I function as the Director of Community Partnerships for BARC. BARC is an artificial intelligence app, and we supervise and monitor school-issued accounts both in G Suite as well as Microsoft Office 365. And then on the home front, you can download the BARC app and use the BARC Home to also supervise and monitor devices that you personally own for your children. I am going to throw out just a quick disclaimer on some of the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight. So if you're at home and you have younger students, I will be using information and things around explicit content. So if you have tiny ears, maybe move them or close doors. I will also be speaking about the topic of suicide for a little bit, and so wonderful trained social workers, counselors, and administrators, as well as, if you're not aware, the 988 hotline is a national hotline. You don't have to be experiencing suicidal ideation to use the hotline. You can just call for mental health resources and support. So I just always want to be sure that I throw that out there before I begin, because this topic does bridge some pretty heavy-duty content, whether you have a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 17-year-old and even a 25-year-old. This is a topic that does bridge into youth mental health as well. So I will show this QR code. At BARC, we have a plethora of resources. We do blogs, we do vlogs, and we have a monthly email campaign where if you opt in using this QR code, you will be sort of in our ecosystem. We don't, flood inboxes with anything that wouldn't be pertinent to students. We keep parents and community members up on the latest and greatest things that our kids are getting into. So if you care to opt in, you can do that now, or you can do that later. This presentation is being recorded and live streamed, so you can go back to that if you don't want to do that right now, and I will also preview that at the end of the presentation as well. So digging into our content tonight, really tonight's presentation is the Now What. So some of you were able to join us for the screening of Childhood 2.0, which is a free documentary that BARC was a part of. And often after the movie, people are like, oh my gosh, okay, so now what? So tonight is about the now what. In my experience as a school professional, as well as somebody who does this now for a living, there are a couple different kinds of parents. You have the restrictor parent, you have the enabler parent, and you have the mentor parent. And so this is an extra layer of parenting. It is fine to be low tech, it is fine to restrict tech. Where I worry about families is when we're enabling and allowing all of it at young ages and not really knowing what we're giving access to. So my hope for you is that you can be a mentor parent, that you can learn alongside of your child, that our children know that we're there for them. In addition, really identifying what types of screen time are our children consuming. I think it's easy for us to walk past an iPad or a laptop or a phone even and say, you're burning your brain out, get off that thing right now, and not really know if our child is using something that's actually redeeming. We have some pretty incredible kids out there that are using technology for good, and they are going to be the children that lead us into the future. We already know that AI is shaping our classrooms and our homes, and so there is more of that advancing technology to come. So I think it's really important to get down and dirty, so to speak, with, what are we as a family consuming? What are we allowing? How is the internet impacting our family? And is there anything else that we can do to mitigate any sort of risk and to protect our whole family, including ourselves? My goal for the children and students in your community is to be self-governed on their technology, to really learn as they go through ages 10 through 18 specifically, how do I use this? How do I feel if I'm using it too much? What does it feel like if I'm on social media or a video game too long? What does it look like when I'm using this for good? How can I have a responsible digital footprint? So I always share with communities that, in this day and age, our digital footprints are very important. So for any 6th through 12th grader that is futuristic thinking, meaning, yeah, I'm gonna get a job after high school, I think I might wanna go into the military, I think I want to go to college, having a shiny, responsible digital footprint is super important. And so I feel so deeply and passionately for specifically our middle and high school students on the front of nobody's really talking to them on an ongoing, pervasive basis about their digital footprint and what their digital footprint can get them for their future. Most kids in middle and high school, if they're using social media, if they're on video games, they're not really realizing that what they say and what they do online can come back to haunt them, and that there are really easy ways to use platforms like LinkedIn, especially for our high school students, to create sort of an e-profile or e-link that they can use as they're applying to colleges, employment, internships, etc. So I spend a lot of time when I speak to student communities about what is on your digital footprint. If your grandma would be embarrassed by what's on it, then we should probably clean it up. It is not enough to say to our students, be kind online. We have witnessed a lot of adults not be kind online. Having gone through just a recent election season, I've seen people going back and forth online and not being kind. So to think that an 11-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old is always going to have the wherewithal and maturity to do so is really unrealistic, knowing the brain science behind students, really having that prefrontal cortex development between 22 to 24 for our young ladies and 26 to 32 for our young men. So really, the whole family needs to come together. There's a vast gap between what students know about technology and how to use it and what some parents know and how to use it. I often hear from parents, well, I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and we didn't have Snapchat, we didn't have TikTok, and so I just feel completely lost, and I just hand it over and hope for the best. And I, as a professional in this field, feel like it's long overdue that we accept that kind of excuse. We have all of the science and all of the research that says this is not great for young brains. And so if we know all of that science and research and we know what the outcomes are, then we have a responsibility to make sure that we're protecting our kids and really mitigating use and risk as well. So I talked a little bit about BARC, and this is just an example of what it looks like. We do website blocking, we do location check-in, we do alerting on safety issues in about 17 different categories. So this is just an example of an alert that would come to a parent phone. Two students, your student and another student are talking back and forth. The conversation starts going south. There's some cyberbullying. The alert would go to the parent phone, and then there's a drop-down menu underneath that to signal to the parent, here are some things and ways to approach your student about this particular alert. Our highest at-risk category in the United States is 15 to 17-year-old boys, and so often parents say to me, I don't really want to use monitoring software because I don't want to invade his or her privacy. And so what I'd ask you to consider is, we wouldn't leave the front door to our home open. And so when we hand over social media, when you hand over a device to a very underdeveloped brain, we're kind of opening them up to risk. And so even though they can drive, even though they have a job, even though they can clothe themselves and make their own lunches, they still have very underdeveloped brains, and there's a lot of access to explicit content, to pornography, to drugs and alcohol. There's a lot of access, especially at the middle and high school level. And so what I would say to that is, there are ways to use things like this, whether it's BARC or another tool, to really just have behavioral insight into what your students are doing. I think that BARC is a really great tool to just, again, kind of serve as like, how is my kid doing? How is the friendship doing? How are the other kids that are communicating with my student doing? In our household, if there's an alert that's a safety issue, as part of our family tech contract, the deal has always been, if I receive an alert that is an imminent safety issue, there's someone self-harming, there's someone suicidal, there's a violent threat to the school or community, we will work together to ask how you as my child want to handle this, but I, as a mandatory reporter, am going to have to do something about this. And so if it's a student-to-student issue where the two children are friends and I have a relationship with the family, that is a different scenario than if I don't know the student is saying something that again is threatening or self-harming. I work with school districts and law enforcement to do that. And so I really encourage parents to think about, these tools don't have to be a gotcha or a punitive tool. It's actually built to just give you insight into how your child is managing their own technology as they do take flight. My goal is for your student by age 18 to be able to manage their own technology as they do take flight and possibly leave your home. And so if we start at 9 or 10 and we build in some golden guardrails or some safety measures, we know that kids are going to bump up against that. And so that's why at the school level and at the home level, we really want kids taking risks. We want them pushing limits. We want them to make digital mistakes. And I'm not sure if kids know that there's no mistake they can't overcome. We have seen across the nation situations and stories where students didn't know that they could overcome a digital mistake because we just aren't having those conversations. And so again, tools like Bark, Guardian, Net Nanny, there's so many Hour Packs, there's so many out there that you can use. I truly, if you don't want to use Bark, that's fine, but you have to use something. You have to be supervising and monitoring these devices because there's just too much going on for our children. So I'd love to offer some resources quickly. I'm a big avid book reader and Audible listener, so these are just a couple of my favorites on the front of our girls and our boys. The Saving Our Sons book, when I left the public school district, I had the great opportunity to go on the road with Dr. Michael Gurian, and for 2 years all I talked about was boys because that is his passion and his research about how we are welcoming our boys in our schools and communities and what we're seeing from health outcomes to academic outcomes to substance abuse prevention and all the things that are going on with both genders. And so the book on the right is just a fantastic opportunity to dig into strategies as girls sort of transition from that upper elementary into middle and high school. The average age of new puberty is 8.5 for our girls and 9 for our boys. So we're seeing a lot of behaviors happening in the upper elementary grades, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, that maybe we used to see in middle school. And so the ramifications of puberty starting earlier is we have bodies that are growing taller and stronger and developing a lot more, but that brain development is still tracking well into the late 20s, early 30s. And so sometimes we look at these, freshman boys that are 6'2" and are like, what were you thinking? And they're like, I don't know. And they really mean that from the standpoint of, impulsivity and being able to control some of those emotions and behaviors. Additionally, in middle school, so I spent 22 years on a middle or high school campus, and really I feel like middle school is like the last best chance to practice everything before you make that huge jump to the high school. And so I'm a huge fan of middle schoolers. I think they're wildly misunderstood. So this book was written by now one of my friends, Phyllis Fagel. She also just wrote a new book called Middle School Superpowers. So if you're parenting around that or if it's coming your way, highly recommend these resources. On the front of sort of our communities where we're seeing high achieving students and high affluence, we have several books that have been written because this community has been named now an at-risk group where we're seeing more substance abuse overdoses, more suicides. And so this book is called Thrivers. It's by Dr. Michelle Borba, who is, again, an excellent author on all things coping and resilience. And so if you are parenting around a high achiever, possibly a student who is gifted or perfectionistic, this is a really great book, not only for parents to understand the culture of sort of pressuring around grades and things like that, but also for students themselves. Lastly, another great book on the front of our boys is How to Raise a Boy. It's a brand new release a couple months ago. Just can't say enough great things about the strategies. And then the self-driven child, I think I mentioned last time I was in town, just really moving parenting from managing our kids' life into consulting. And so all of this wraps into device use in the sense of when kids are super stressed out and they don't have tolerance to stress, devices become a really great escape. Video games, watching explicit content, scrolling for hours, Instagram. What we know to be true at this point from the data and the science is that kids are stressed. And so we have kids that are tolerating normal stress, which we want for coping and resiliency, but we have other children that have toxic levels of stress or chronic stress that is sort of shutting them down, or it's amping up that central nervous system, and that's where we're seeing the anxiety, depression, and self-harm. So can't say enough great things about this book and these authors I've come to know fairly well. And just really understanding that we don't have to do everything for our kids, that when we intervene and do homework for them, or call the school all the time, or pack their lunch, or pick out their outfits, you know, kids that have a sense of control over their own lives, they actually thrive. Kids that feel pressured actually start to shut down. Some of them will isolate, or, as I said, the anxiety and depression can set in if they feel just so overwhelmed. And so all of this wraps into the device use as well. Some things that I've seen over the years change with childhood, and that's why my presentation is called Childhood 2.0, also named after the movie, but just really looking at safety in general and how we talk about safety around our students. After Columbine and after 9/11, we saw a huge shift at the local, state, and federal level around school safety and what we call safe play. You know, back in the day, we didn't have, you know, 17 different lunch aides standing around saying, don't run too fast, don't climb on that, don't do this, don't do that. And as we've seen sort of the uptick in, you know, liability on the front of the school district and then this over supervision, we're seeing students do less free play and take less risks. And so with that, then comes these devices. So if we're telling them, you know, no, you can't go out and play, and we're handing them an iPad, the choice is going to be the iPad over going out to play. So, you know, all of this combined becomes sort of a recipe for some for disaster. If we're not moving our body, then we can't be as academically engaged. If we feel too pressured about grades, we're starting to shut down. So devices come into play as, again, numbing and escape agents. Additionally, we've had sort of a big, huge movement talking about bullying. That also started around that same time. So I'll speak a little bit more later in the presentation about bullying and how we can maybe reframe some of our conversations around that. But I just think it's super important to understand, like, these kids don't know life without technology. They were born with it. We sort of nag them. A lot of us yell at them about it. They don't know life without it. And so we have to get super clear around, again, what are all of these stressors in their life that may be leading them towards technology and towards exposure that we don't want them to have. I've talked about the documentary Childhood 2.0, and we showed it last time, so I won't be showing the trailer tonight, but if you are looking for it, you can find it for free on YouTube. We also have a Childhood 2.0 movie, its own dedicated website, childhood2movie.com. So if you're looking for the movie, that's where you can find it. I'm going to outline tonight some tenets of current school and community safety issues. I don't have time to go through all of it, but I think, you know, as communities, as somebody who has watched incidences across the country, really, you know, when I think about what keeps children safe, what makes them feel safe, how devices weave into all of this, you know, really feeling like they fit in, feeling like they have a sense of belonging at school and at home is a really great protective factor against a lot of different things. I will speak to, as I said, the bullying and the dignity piece, so here on the screen. I don't know if our kids know that they have dignity, but it is being challenged every day. When I speak to students and I ask them, you know, how many times a day do you get teased or challenged about who you are and what you look like and what you're wearing and how athletic you are and where you live and what shoes you have, and, you know, most kids say about 3 to 5 times a day, even from my own friends or people that I've known for a long time. And so, you know, when we think about mental health, when we think about why students are using devices so much, we really look at what is their empowerment, what is their sense of, I know how to handle this, I have confidence to handle any situation that comes my way. And one of the words and, you know, sort of feelings I want them to have is that I have dignity and nobody has the right to take that away from me. And I really feel confident, and with research behind it, when kids know I have a sense of control over the situation, I have a sense of control over my own life, we know that those brains thrive. We know when kids feel like they're out of control or they don't have control, that they suffer. And so when we look at nationally the rates of suicide amongst our youth age 11 to 14 and 15 to 24, we've definitely seen an escalation in that. We've definitely seen an escalation in aggression, and post-COVID, which I would call 21 and after, we've seen, on our middle school and high school campuses, we've seen more aggression and more assaults than we've ever seen before. And so working together, parents as partners, we have a huge generation of parents, myself included, who are pretty nervous about parenting in this landscape. Whenever I speak to parent communities and I ask, what was the reason you got your child a phone? Most of the responses are, well, I got him a phone because I needed to be in contact with them at all times, and because I was afraid if there was ever a school shooting that they could call me. And so one of the most unsafe things we can do is to give a third grader a phone because we think a school shooting might happen. Schools are very safe. There's less than a 1% chance that's going to happen, but we are prepared. We are training our students. We have staffs that are trained. We have law enforcement that know what they're doing. Getting a third grader a phone because this might happen is not a great excuse to get a device. And so I'll walk you through a few strategies around the when and how and why we should be getting devices, and if you've already given it, it's never too late to scale some things back as well. So I'm just going to run through tonight 5 protective factors that I think really help bolster and buffer some of the yuck that our kids face. Social media is an excellent tool to find validation. And so when I think about the thousands and millions of people that are posting photos of their children and all the great things their children are doing, if we really break it down, it is the attachment of being seen, heard, and loved. When I post a photo of my children, I get lots of likes and lots of comments. That's validation for me as a parent. When a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 17-year-old posts a photo on Instagram, there's a ton of being seen, heard, and loved. And so when we have these devices in our hands as parents, we can't see, hear, and love our children. And when I speak to students, one of their biggest complaints is, one of the reasons I do some things that I do is because I can't get my parents' attention because they're on their laptops or their phones. So I would say first and foremost, we have a lot of work to do on the front of adults and our use of devices, but to really break down when parents call me and say, I'm really worried that my 12-year-old is addicted to her device, is not necessarily the device itself, it's the attachment need that's being met there. She's being seen, she's being heard, she's being loved. And so if we're not meeting those needs at school and at home for our students, they will find somebody on the internet to do that, whether that's a friend, a stranger, an older person, pornography, a video game, whatever it is, the need will be met by someone else or something else. And so really being present, putting down our own devices and being able to really have those conversations with our kids and spending quality time, which is hard to do when you have a full-time job and most of your financial livelihood is on your email or on your phone itself. But I would say, the single best predictor of how your child or a student will use a phone is how their parents or caregiver uses technology as well. I've talked a little bit about brain science so far, so I won't go too far into that, but when we look at when do brains really suffer or sort of go offline, so to speak, it's when things are unpredictable and they feel like they have that low sense of control. So Instagram, I don't have control as a 14-year-old what people are saying about me on Instagram. So that would be a point where things would be maybe a threat to my ego, maybe unpredictable, and a low sense of control. So a lot of people point to Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat as, the devil, so to speak, or the problem. The platforms themselves are obviously open to bullying and pornography and trafficking and trade of drugs and alcohol and all the yuck that we know about, but it's also this abyss of kids trying to manage their social life in person and then getting home or at lunchtime or after school or all night long, also managing their online persona. And it is exhausting. They've got like their in-school persona and their online persona, and they're literally doing 2 full-time jobs. And so I think it's really important for parents to get clear around not only what are they consuming, but when are they consuming it, how long, and how much access we're giving them as well. Protective factor number 2, we've seen across the country this incredible movement, and I really want to credit the students that just left college have done a really great job in destigmatizing help seeking. And so we saw pre-COVID, we saw more kids than we wanted moving into this center lane of distress, and more kids than we wanted moving into crisis. And so I can only speak for the county I live in has 4 million people in it. We have 5 hospitals that serve teenagers. We have 2 hospitals that serve kids 12 and under for psychiatric needs. And so we are on a wait every night for any student that is tracking into crisis with cutting, self-harm, and suicidal ideation or attempt. And so really, my goal for your students is, I want them to be in the lane of well-being. I want them to have a little bit of good distress. I didn't do well in math today. Someone pushed me off the swing. Somebody kicked me under the table. Somebody was mean to me. Like, those things need to happen in order for our kids to learn how to stretch and grow and cope. If we as teachers and administrators and parents continue to intervene on the lower level things, they will never build that muscle to cope. And that's really what we've seen is we have students that are sitting in this persistent lane of distress, and we have a few moving into crisis. The national average of a student moving from distress into crisis and considering not being here anymore is 15 minutes to 2 weeks for our young boys and men. And so that's a pretty short window of time. And so really being able to recognize, when is my kid good? What are the warning signs that she or he's not doing so well? How are we moving them back into well-being? What are sort of their own self-soothing mechanisms that they themselves can manage stress and build that tolerance? And do we know as parents and educators what the warning signs of crisis are? Because especially for our 6th through 12th graders, some of them are very cryptic signs, some are very nonverbal, some are very outright. And just to mention something, that came to me through training, anxiety and depression specifically in our young boys typically manifests itself as anger and rage. So I've had, fortunately and unfortunately, the opportunity to sit with parents who have lost a child to suicide who have said to me, I wish I would have known that anxiety and depression showed up angry, because I thought he was just being a jerk. And then after we lost him, I looked in his phone and saw pages and pages of messages to friends saying, I'm just so sad. And so really, paying attention to not only in-person behavior, but also online text messaging. There's no mystery to these kids' life. Everything you want to know about any child is on their device, whether it's a video game chat, a notes section, text messaging, direct messages. Everything you want to know is there. And so it is, again, long overdue that we say, I don't want to look in that because I'm a little scared. We have to be brave enough so that we can support them through that. And so just looking at, some national stats from the American College Health Association study, the kids that just left college made it really kind of cool to come forward when you don't feel well from a mental health standpoint. So we've been telling people for about 50 years, if you don't feel well from a mental health standpoint, come forward, come forward, come forward. And so now we have droves of students, both, pre-K through 12, coming forward, and schools specifically are like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, we only have 2 guidance counselors and 1 social worker, and we don't have the help you need. And so you don't have to be a behavioral health therapist, you don't have to be a nurse, you don't have to be a social worker to listen and to validate and to be empathetic. And so I don't think we'll ever have as many resources at the school level that we need, but we are now more aware as a nation that mental health is important. And so as a trusted adult, if we are going to say to kids, come to us, come to us, come to us, and then when they come to us, we're like, oh, you're fine, in a year this won't matter, just ignore him, I'm sure you'll get over it. Those are not strategies. Those are ways that we as adults make ourselves feel better. And we have all of the data, as you can see in front of you, that more kids are coming forward. So when you destigmatize help seeking, more people are coming forward to find help. So I hear often from people like, what is wrong with these kids? What's wrong with this generation? They're soft, they're this, they're that, these devices, you know, all the things. We have been messaging for a long time that it's okay to come forward. And so as schools, as churches, as communities, as parents, when they come to us, if we want to be trusted and if we want communication to be wide open, then the things that we say in response have to prove to them that we are there for them. And some of our responses at times can be not so great. And so, you know, these stats are from 2010 and 2018. Lots of headlines about COVID ruined our kids. These stats show that prior to COVID, we were already in a youth mental health crisis. We were also in an adult mental health crisis. And so again, devices play into this because some of our children are not getting enough sleep, which is impacting their mental health and physical health as well. Most of our 6th through 12th graders are getting about 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And so going back to that academic performance, the pressure to be in club sports, and you have to do this many volunteer hours and all the things, we have to get super clear on how are we protecting their sleep. And one of the ways we can do that is to not allow devices behind bedroom doors. Central charging station where all of the devices go in the off position, allowing our kids to not scroll all night, not text with others and get into conflict, not access pornography and explicit content. Like, it's just so important that devices are out of the bedroom and are in a central location, to include adult devices as well. And so kids don't love me when I present that to them, but a lot of them will come up after and say, so I am willing to put my device like across the bedroom and not under my pillow. Is that a good first step? I'm willing to meet them on that, but there are plenty of, you know, things like echo dots and old-fashioned alarm clocks that they can use to listen to music and to wake up. They don't need an iPhone to do that, because that's typically the excuse that I hear from them. On this protective factor, just really going back to reflective listening. So one of my favorite takeaways from the book, The Self-Driven Child, is Are We Listening? And one of their acronyms in the book, The Self-Driven Child, is WIGGY, What I Got Is. And so as the mother of 4 teenage girls, I hear a lot of stories. There's a lot of emotion going on in friendships and relationships. And one of the things that, you know, I think they appreciate the most is, are you listening to me? Often as adults, we are already formulating an answer in our head. They can see it scrolling across. We're already ready to spit it out. And, you know, I find specifically in school districts, governing board members, superintendents, many of them, most of the time, are between about 45 and 80 years old. And some of them have children and some of them do not. Some of them have grandchildren that sort of miss the curve on the social media. And so if we're making policy around social media, then we need to understand it, meaning those governing board members need to have TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat on their phone. They need to understand what it's like to be a kid today. And so as kids come to us, as kids are disciplined for digital mistakes they're making, for the things they're saying online, it's super important that trusted adults are current and relevant, and that when we respond to them, we're responding with that validation and empathy. That's really when you break down, you know, human connection. It's, I'm validating you, I'm feeling vulnerable too, I'm able to connect with you on your level. So a lot of the responses I hear from all sorts of people is like, I don't understand this generation, I don't understand Snapchat, I don't get TikTok, why are these kids so blah, blah, blah. We got to cut that out. If we are trusted adults and we are saying come to us, then we have to understand what they're going through. And the only way we can do that is to dig in with ourselves and for them as well. I've mentioned sort of this public health model approach to wellness, so really thinking about your children, what lane are they in? And this is, this can change moment to moment, especially if you have a 4th through 12th grader where things are good when they leave for school, they come home, they're distressed, hopefully they're moving back into well-being, but really putting in, those family resources and that time and that dedicated time at school where we have resourceful people that they can go to, whether it's a guidance counselor, a coach, a social worker, a trusted teacher, where they just have that sounding board. In pre-kindergarten, we teach them, if you see smoke or fire, stop, drop, and roll. I really want all students to have an emotional stop, drop, and roll. If we say to them, oh, there's smoke, fire, they're like, stop, drop, and roll. I want to be able to say to a kid, what happens when your heart's on fire? What happens when your brain's on fire? What are 3 things that you can do to really make yourself feel better? Because a lot of times it's us intervening and sort of doing the soothing. We have a generation of kids that doesn't really know how to do it for themselves. And I think that really moves the needle, both academically and social emotionally, when they're like, yeah, I'm really frustrated, I'm really upset, I'm in tears tonight, but I know tomorrow's gonna be better because I'm gonna go for a run, or I'm gonna listen to my Calm app, or I'm gonna do some watercolors, or I'm gonna go hug my favorite stuffed animal, like whatever the thing is. The coping strategies are really what they're missing as we look at sort of this pendulum of behaviors and emotionality. I've talked a little bit about 9/11 and Columbine, and that's really when I started to notice the school safety conversation shift, and we started, hunkering down in the playground, and like really just a lot of the messaging that we give to kids around safety is kind of warped, meaning, you can't go down the street to the park because you might get kidnapped, but here is an iPhone 15 for Christmas and it has no restrictions on it. Good luck with the World Wide Web. I've also seen tools like the Grade Portal and Life 360. Those are also behavioral insight tools that were built for parents and others to have supervision and monitoring so that we can have behavioral insight into how the student is doing. They were never built so that we could hammer our kids about, you were driving too fast, why did you go to Brody's house, you're supposed to be at Caden's house. Those are all typical risks that our kids are going to take that we took. And the reason that they are so anxious is that we are so anxious about where they're going, who they're with, what they're doing, and we're tracking their every move. On the front of the grade portal, you see a missing assignment and assume the worst. If you see a missing assignment, that's an opportunity to have a conversation. If you see a D, that is a signal to you that your student did not master the content. And instead of taking away the car and the phone and the video game and all the things, perhaps sitting down and working on the math skill. And so this technology has sort of shaped the conversation about the world is scary and schools are not safe. And so our kids are feeling that tension, they're feeling the anxiety, and when they hear, I'm gonna get you a phone in case there's a school shooting, they are part of that conversation, and they really truly feel like a phone is going to save their life. And we have a ton of data behind the Oxford shooting, the Uvalde shooting, the Parkland shooting, where students did have phones and we were unable to save their lives using phones. What saves lives is being trained, being confident, telling them that you know how to get out of the situation. Here are the steps to do that. You know that you have a gut intuition about what to do. I believe in you, I trust you, we're gonna work on this together. And so I hear a lot, we have 33% of our third graders have been given a phone on the front of school safety. And so I really just want kids to know that they are safe and that we do know what we're doing. And I want parents to trust schools that we are safe and we know what we're doing. So this graph just really is what I've experienced over the years of, as a school person myself and as a parent, like For a long time, we've been telling kids, if someone's mean to you, go get Mr. So-and-so. If someone kicks you, go get Mrs. So-and-so. If someone, takes your lunch, go get the lunch lady. If someone slams you into the locker in the locker room, go get the coach. And so the locus of control has become like, I can't handle this myself, so I'm supposed to go get an adult, and the adult is going to save the problem. And so for the last 22 years, we as schools have told kids, like, come to us and we will fix it. And we are wonderful and we love to help, but it's not our conflict to solve. It's actually the kids that are involved. And they're actually really smart and really capable and really savvy. And if we give them an opportunity to build their vocabulary, if there's student A and student B got into it, the conversation should largely be between student A and student B. It really shouldn't be the adult doing all of the talking. And so really reframing around the word dignity and really instilling in kids, like, I believe that you have this, you are inherently worthy, and I want you to be socially competent. And the only way that kids can go from a tiny elementary to a bigger middle school to a huge high school and be socially competent is to have some kind of yucky experiences, to lose a best friend, to not be invited to the birthday party, to not be able to sit at the lunch table with that person because they decided they didn't like you that day, to be pushed off a swing. Like, those are all unfortunately normal things that happen that build social competence by standing up for yourself and standing up for others. And so my goal for students anywhere is to really understand what dignity is, what respect is, and understand how they walk hand in hand. When students are embarrassed in front of a group of other students, their dignity has been denied. When one student tries to silence someone or bullies them and stomps out their voice, so to speak, their dignity has been denied. And so this generation in particular, especially our secondary students, most of them have some sort of voice online. And so they want a voice in their classroom. They want a voice at your kitchen table. They want to know that the people in my life are going to stand up for my dignity. And even if I made a mistake, that they are not going to call me names, they're not going to shame me, they're not going to humiliate me, they're not going to embarrass me. Those are the things that we do as parents and trusted adults that absolutely deny kids dignity. And then we sort of look at them and we're like, you need to respect me. And I can just say this generation is like over it. They're like, I have lost respect for the word respect if you do not uphold my dignity. And so I think dignity and really the act of between students is what builds a school culture, it's what builds a family. Siblings fight, going at it. It's really great practice at home when kids are arguing back and forth and using sort of one-liners that are appropriate. That's building the vocabulary and the muscle so that they can go to school and self-advocate and advocate for others. This whole system of like, this kid's the bully and this kid's the victim, it's crushing our kids. We have taken away their voice, and we have kids that are being labeled bullies that are not, and we have kids that are being labeled victims, and that is not helping anyone either. And so in thinking about the 65,000 kids that I've supervised over the years, I can't think of a student of mine that was an actual bully. I can think of some kids that pushed limits. I can think of typical situations where two kids got into it and were having a moment that we call bullying. But to think about, the kids that are malicious and intimidating and harassing every day, I don't know those kids. I know kids that have moments, that take it too far, that do some things that are terrible, that need to be held accountable, but I don't think that kids are born bullies. And I think labeling them, using the word bullying, is really tearing our kids down, and it's not helping them become mature or socially competent. And so really encouraging parents to role play at home. Chloe was mean to me today. Well, I'm Katie, you're Chloe, what are you gonna do tomorrow? What are the strategies? What does it sound like when you stand up for yourself? If those kinds of conversations can be happening in elementary school, then middle school and high school becomes so much easier. It's just, an ongoing conversation that I have in many communities. When I look at the unwanted behaviors that happen in schools, a lot of it could be labeled mean, annoying, and rude. That's not to say kids are mean, annoying, and rude. It means sometimes they behave meanly or rudely or annoyingly. This last column, where kids are being malicious and harassing and intimidating and publicly and relentlessly targeting another student, that is absolutely what fits the litmus test in most districts for bullying. Some of this lower level stuff where kids are sort of giving each other a hard time, they're sort of bonding with each other, roasting each other and teasing, that, especially in boy world, is how they interact. And it's not to say everything goes, but it is to say that conflict is inevitable. Our students are going to have conflict. People are going to be mean to them. Someone's going to say something rude. What are they going to say back? Some of our typical responses are things like, well, why don't you go find some new friends? And the kid is in like 10th grade. Like, that is not an easy task when you're in 10th grade to just go find new friends the next day. Just ignore her. Most students that come to us that are telling us this person will not let up have already tried to ignore that person for a long time before they come to us. And so again, being current and relevant in our approach to 2024, 2025, and how relentless some of this teasing and bullying type behavior is really important, but also noting some of the things that we label as bullying may not actually be bullying. They may be mean, annoying, and rude, and there are some lower level strategies that we can teach our kids on how to become empowered. All of this is super important as it relates to in person. If students can't stand up for themselves in person, they will struggle online. And so cyberbullying, harassment, all the things, hate speech, profanity, all the things that we see both at home and at school, we can mitigate a lot of that if we start at these younger ages to empower kids to know how to hold on to their dignity and really just be that person that can stand up for themselves and others. Lastly, perspective factor number 5, as I said, phones and tech have a place. There's a huge movement across the country to do away for the day, where bell to bell there are no phones out in our schools. That book, The Anxious Generation, really outlines some easy ways to implement that. Looking at screen time, in the book Glow Kids, they talk about digital vegetables versus digital candy. So not all screen time is terrible, not all YouTube is terrible. Some of it is absolutely terrible, but looking at this top brain here, you can see this student is doing some homework, they're doing a project, they're engaged in good tech, where there's blood flow, they're engaged in the task. Where we worry about kids is that bottom brain. Hasn't moved body in a while, blood flow is going down, maybe hasn't even talked to a human being. If they're on a video game, they're probably talking to each other, but I know kids that play video games for 4, 5, 6 hours and don't even get up to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom. And so the video game industry has really swallowed up a lot of our students, and they have figured this out by taking the young brain and really shoving it deep into the brainstem. So that's why I have that red line there. When a kid is on a video game or on social media and you walk in and you're like, time for dinner, the reason you're getting the reaction you're getting is that whole brain is covered in dopamine and cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So a lot of the calls I get from moms and dads of video gamers or someone that's really dependent on social media have to do with the reaction. Like, why are they being such a jerk? Why did he just chuck the remote against the wall? That is all the dopamine and the cortisol just covering the brain, and it's an impulsive reaction on the front of the student, but it's not their fault. It's the video game platform has figured out how to capture their attention and how to keep them online as long as possible. And so some strategies to think about, drinking water is an immediate release of sort of flushing out some of this dopamine and cortisol and moving their body. I would never back up video game use to dinner time. I would not allow a kid to play video games or be on a phone prior to bedtime, at least 1 hour. You're going to see these types of reactions. I'm sure you've seen the 2 or 3-year-old in Costco like spazzing out when the mom takes the phone. There's nothing wrong with that child. That child's brain has been completely hijacked. And so if we get clear about this, we can have some empathy and compassion for our kids and really recognize we've handed over the Ferrari with no driver's ed, and we are expecting them to drive straight in the lane, and they're not. They're literally crashing and burning. And so just thinking about, our own use, I shared, I think last time that, we have created a digital footprint for our kids. Prior to age 2, we're out there taking videos, taking photos, they're saying, please stop, we still go. They have a digital footprint that they had no permission in. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of photos of them posted online that they had no permission in. So when they get a phone or a device, they want to create their own digital footprint. The problem is they've had 0 training. And most parents are like, I don't know how the social media stuff works, so I'm just gonna let them do their thing. And so again, going back to school policies and looking at consequences at home, if we recognize that we've done this thing with no training, then our consequences may have some more empathy behind them as well. Lastly, just thinking about video games as well as digital mistakes, like video game chat rooms are full of profanity and hate speech. The headset is a purposeful measure by the industry so that parents have no idea what your children are doing. Additionally, this is just a photo of the #1 softball team in America from a few years ago. They got into a conflict with the other team. They flipped him off. This is a unfortunately typical 8th grade thing to do. This was captured and plastered all over the front page of the USA Today newspaper. So when you Google these girls' names, this photo comes up about 300 times. So we are not doing a great job of talking to kids about the culture they're living in. We have seen celebrities, we have seen influencers, we have seen NFL athletes, professional athletes be canceled for something that they said 10 years ago. We have children who look like yours and mine who post things not thinking because their brains are really underdeveloped. So having ongoing pervasive conversations around what are you posting, what do you think about this, I saw this posted, and having conversations around what's appropriate, what's not. I would pull out famous people and what they've done and showcase what mistake did he make here? Going forward as you're using social media or as you're using technology, what would you want the world to know about you? People often ask me, when should I give social media? I show them things like this. This is an anonymous hate page created on Instagram on a Saturday night about a girl that lives down the street. This also, below this, has 300 comments, both for and against the girl whose name is Hayden. This is not a school issue. This happened on a Saturday. Both students attended the same school, and then on Monday you can see the girl that posted this awfulness got everybody together in person. And so our kids are sort of being squished both online and in person, and they're trying to run pass interference for themselves, but they have no idea what to do. And so this type of thing can upend a school, a grade level on Monday morning for school administration. The school typically does not have jurisdiction to step in. The police don't either unless there's a direct threat made to a student's life. So even though this is awfulness, in our district at least, we could counsel the student, we could comfort the student, but we are not the Instagram police, and Instagram does not care. There's actually no human being that you can call at Instagram and say, please take this down about my child. You can report the page, you can block the person, but that's about as far as it goes. And so this remains up for the entire week. All the kids are talking about it. It is a total nightmare for this family and specifically this 8th grade student. And so when people ask me, when should I give social media, I show them things like I've showed you tonight. when you are willing to have your kids sort of be on full display with no past interference, and this is what we're handing over. Additionally, I talked a little bit, I think last time, very briefly about the topic of sexting, the topic of sextortion. So this is our screenshots from an 18-year-old who lives down the street from me who was sextorted. And so you can see some screenshots of his school athletic page. He was an athlete. This person, who does not live in the United States, pretended to be a pretty girl at his school. They traded messages. The images were inappropriate. As soon as the messages were traded, the awful person said, if you don't send me $500, I'm going to send this to all of your friends, your whole school, all of your followers on Instagram. So you can see the back and forth conversation between this person and the student. The FBI in most states has released a press release around this. They are specifically targeting 12 to 18-year-old boys. I get calls weekly from my own 5-mile radius of boys specifically that are being targeted. Some of them have spent $2,000, $500, $200, and most of these people that are doing this live in Nigeria, West Africa, and they have figured out how to do this all day, all night. And specifically with boys, they're more hesitant to tell parents what's going on because they're embarrassed. This person is shaming them. That's not to say that sextortion does not happen to our young ladies as well, but this seems to be, it's been a trend targeting boys for about the last 3 years. It tripled also during the pandemic. Lastly, on the front of social media, platforms that allow images like this do not care about our children. Any platform, which would include Snapchat, Discord, Twitter, TikTok, all of the things, Instagram. There are communities of self-harm. There are communities that are showcasing how to do these things. So people often ask me, how did my child learn how to do this? How is my child feeling so yucky? And I'm like, this is an entire community of children and adults who are talking about these types of things. And so when the Surgeon General and when many governors are saying, please don't give your child social media until 16, please stave off a phone until at least 14, there's a reason for that. And again, the science and data points to that. On the front of, some mental health and school safety stuff, I will just quickly flip through some images that have come my way over the years. As I said, there's no mystery to how a child is feeling. And so when you are supervising and monitoring social media and you're looking at these cumulative posts, you can see, my kid's doing pretty well, what's going on here, typical, not so typical. And so language has a lot of meaning for our kids, and they use this as a megaphone to the world. And it is not a school's job to follow students online. It is not a coach's job to do so. It is a parent's job to supervise and monitor social media and any device. And so, we have had here in Arizona some situations where after the fact, we've been able to look back and look at these types of posts and really see these glaring red flags. And so I'd really love parents to consider monitoring and supervision, even if your child is, again, 15 to 18. Additionally, on the front of school safety and school incidences that have happened across the country, we often see those red flags about 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time, and sometimes even years ahead of time. And so typically there's what we call ideation and leakage. You often see a teenager after a school shooting say things like, yeah, he was kind of weird, and yeah, he didn't have many friends, and yeah, he said some weird stuff, and I saw his YouTube, and it was really weird, and he posted some stuff on Instagram that was threatening. It's all there. Our kids are seeing it, they're feeling it, they know who is feeling this way. they are hesitant to come to us, and they're hesitant to come to us for two reasons. Number one, snitches still get stitches, and number two, they're afraid that we will freak out and not be able to handle it, and perhaps if they report someone, that someone will find out and retaliate. And so again, going back to being a really good trusted adult is digging into this and understanding what is out there, but also understanding and listening to what they're saying. There's just some quick examples here of sort of those burning red flags that have happened across the country. This is the math paper of Ethan Crumbly from Michigan, who wrote this on his math paper. Teacher was alarmed, sent him to the front office. He scratched it all out and redid it and said all these things on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see, he said, "I love my life so much. Oxford High School rocks." That's a pretty strong message that he was sending, that he didn't belong. Like he, you know, what he felt was on the left and what he redid was on the right. And all of it speaks to, I don't belong here and I am willing to hurt myself and others. And so all of these types of messages were also posted on his YouTube, were also posted on social media. And a ton of kids said, yeah, I knew he was saying these things, I didn't know how bad it was. And so if we want these things to stop, we really have to do that monitoring and supervision. There's really no mystery of the runway of the lead up to things like this in our communities. And so I'm just super passionate about adults really digging into this. So I will be quiet. I've said a whole lot in a short amount of time. I'll put this QR code up as I said I would so that you can opt in if you'd like more resources from BARC. But I think the last thing I would just say is most families are fighting over devices. Most families are like, you know, happy birthday, here's your iPad. You hit your brother, give me your iPad. I'm really tired tonight, here's your iPad back. You're not doing well enough, give me your iPad. This dance that we're doing with phones and iPads and video games, like it's ruining us. It's ruining our relationship with kids. And as they age into middle and high school, you know, someone is going to offer your child a vape. Someone is going to offer your child marijuana. Someone is going to say, let's go to this unsupervised party. Someone is going to ask them out on a date and want to do something they don't want to do. And so I really want parents to be practicing that open communication and not allowing an iPhone or an iPad to be an obstacle, because right now it is a huge obstacle between parents and children. And sometimes I'm in communities where, you know, moms will come up to me after and say, my 9-year-old is literally holding us hostage. Like this dance that you're talking about, we're just ruined over it. And so really getting clear in the new year about how are we going to lead technology instead of technology leading us? Because currently, I do think, unfortunately, the industry is still winning. We're getting better, there's more information out there, there's more people engaging in the conversation, but really not allowing a device to be an obstacle between yourself and your child. So I will open for questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Katie, I would ask one that I think about from Childhood 2.0, which seemed to be one of the challenges, such as delaying phones to 14 and those things, is that whole, the impact on mental health of being left out, and that whole fear of being left out. Can you speak a little bit to, so if we're advising parents or trying to, you know, manage children who feel that isolation and ostracism if they don't have that kind of access?
Yeah, I really think it goes back to, and this is more personal than professional, but I know others that do it, is really, you know, starting at 18 and working backwards to like 9. So between 9 and 18, how are we going to do this together? I always encourage people to look at incremental baby steps of trust. There are some fantastic devices out there. So if you have a 12-year-old that is begging you for a phone, that's begging you for Snapchat, you don't have to give all the things. So if you do decide that my child's being left out and I feel like they're 14, they're 13, and I want to give something, you can give a really dumb smartphone. You can either take an old iPhone or Android and turn off everything except calling and texting, and they have only a certain number of people they can do that with. Gab has a phone out, Bark has a phone out, TrueMe, Pinwheel. We have like these baby starter phones that are super safe, that allow them to sort of have that communication with peers, but it's not all the yuck. It's not the internet, it's not social media, it's literally just calling and texting. On the Bark phone, we have Bark, baked into it. So the safety alerting system, the location check-in, the website blocking, it's a pretty safe device to be able to give to some of those secondary students that are sort of begging for it. I would also say, doing social media together. So if you decide that you want to give it for whatever reason, doing it together. You have to have the login passwords. You can start on your own phone and say, okay, we're gonna have a joint Instagram account. I'm going to be able to see what you're doing. We're going to do this together. I do know that exclusion is real. My own children, other children, lots of questions around this. What I have seen work in a lot of communities is the Wait Until 8th program, which is a national program started by a couple moms in Georgia, where grassroots movements of moms and dads say, we're not going to do this until 8th grade. And so can we band together as friendship group and not give it so that my kid isn't left out? And so I've seen truly, and especially this summer, this national movement of people saying, we're not going to do this, and we're going to band together, and we're going to have parties together and sleepovers together and all the things, and we're just not going to give in to the pressure of this. And so it is difficult, especially with sports and activities, and sometimes coaches are even communicating on Snapchat. So really, having the courageous conversations as a school community, as a PTO, as a site council, as friendship groups in the community, as even just a neighborhood. I think it is very difficult, but it can be done, and I think the delay is the way. That campaign, especially this summer, has picked up a lot of steam. But it is, I will agree with you, it is difficult when every 8th grader has a phone and your kid is the one that is left out. And so that's where I think these other devices can be a bridge, so that they can at least serve as a communication tool, but not give all of the awful stuff. On that note, if you are going to purchase a device for your child, Androids are much safer phones in general. Whatever Android you choose, whether it's a Bark or a Gab or just a regular Android, they are much, much safer than iPhones.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
It's a question and comment. We gave our daughter a home last year, and she kind of broke her privileges, and we went a little atomic and a little farther than what I think you recommended. We actually took it away from her for 6 months. We just told her that she showed us that she wasn't mature enough yet. That being said, during the 6 months, I actually felt like I got my daughter back. So now that she's about to get her phone back, we're really hesitant to even go as far as we were before. And we had the Bark monitoring, so she had a phone, what I would consider phone light to begin with. But as you said, she's much more savvy than I am, so she was still able to find a way to get in trouble, even though we put everything in place. But I kind of want to elaborate a little bit further on your comment about not jumping to take away, because one of the dialogues I was having with her was, if she does this again, it's going to be another 6 months, right? Where there's going to be consequences, and I guess I need to do a little bit more background or research on other options there. But I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah. How old is she?
She turned 13 last week.
Okay. So, 13 is so wonderful, isn't it? 2 at once. I have 4. I've been through 13 4 times, so I feel for you. So first suggestion, the book Untangled would be a fantastic resource for you on this topic and others. My second thing is, so she is about halfway through the development of her prefrontal cortex. So sitting down and making a family tech contract and really thinking about what are the reasonable rules around this device. So for example, we don't give out our address, we don't wear our school logo in photos, we don't trade inappropriate photos, like whatever your things are, really getting clear as a family, like what are our mom and dad's non-negotiables, but then allowing her to have a voice in the contract as well, knowing that she is going to bump up against those rules and there will be natural consequences. So what I would say about the taking of the phone is when there's a behavior that is related to the phone that you don't like and you take the phone, then we're working on the skill that you don't like. For example, if she posts something inappropriate and you find out about it and you take the phone, we're sitting down and talking about decision making. If she's not doing well in math and you take the phone because the phone is impeding her math skills, then we're taking the phone and we're working on the skill of math mastery. So we do this weird thing as parents where we get ticked off and we take the phone arbitrarily and we think that like in 2 days, poof, she's gonna be better. Now, I know, as you just pointed out, like you took it away for X amount of time and you got your daughter back. So we already have data about her brain and how it is impacted by this device. And so really being reasonable, but also realistic around how much screen time should she have per day. And if she is reacting to that screen time in a negative fashion, then as part of the contract that she has a voice in and has buy-in in, like we're not doing this like parents versus kid, we're doing this together. And so you have about 5 years to do this right? And so I'm not saying don't ever take her device, but you've already outlined, my kid changed when she had this. And so what are the reasonable guardrails that we can come up with where we're easing her back into use, but we're not allowing all the things. And if we do allow some and we see her, not meeting the pillars of wellness, so to speak, then we in the contract have already said to her, we're gonna scale it back. So it's not a surprise, it's not a fight, it's like, hey, remember, we talked about if we saw some of these things, we're gonna lay off use. And allowing her as a 13-year-old, because she's, I bet she's pretty savvy, right? And she wants to have that voice. I think where we go wrong is we do this top-down thing, and then we're super arbitrary and take it away. If she has a voice in the contract, knowing that as she ages, we may be giving more freedoms. Like maybe right now there's no social media, maybe we'll revisit that at age 14 and see where we're at and see where the world is at with regulations, right? So I think if I were you, I would think 13 to 18, what are the incremental baby steps that I want to take and how will she know what the rules are? Because most of our kids don't know what the rules are, and that is where we start fighting about this and it is ruining all of us, right? So again, it is okay to give some and scale it back and say to her, like, we're new at this too, we're gonna try this, but if we see that it's impacting your grades, your sleep, your hygiene, your behavior at home, your behavior at school, we're gonna have to scale it back. And I think kids appreciate us being upfront about what the rules actually are. Now I know, and she is going to do something and she's gonna need a consequence. But the consequence shouldn't be tied just to the phone, it should be tied to what she did. The punishment needs to fit the crime, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Is anybody else, John?
Hey, Katie, in the first session, we talked a little bit about making sure that, route of communication is open between the student and the kid and the parents, and especially with the consequences piece. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that regarding we want to keep that line open so if they are in trouble or have, someone is extorting them or, they did something, they made a mistake online and how they can get help to do that?
Yeah. I would say specifically around access to pornography and sharing of photos. the average age of access to pornography is 8. The average students that are trading nude photos starts at 11. So that's our 6th and 7th graders. So we know these things are coming. We know that at some point your kid is probably going to stumble on a hyperlink of pornography. And so for little kids, I, always outline, like, this is a no trouble bubble. Like, you can always come to me and you can tell me anything, and this is the no trouble bubble. For older kids, really having those courageous conversations with them, like, I know some big stakes decisions are coming your way, and there's no mistake that you could make that we could not overcome. I'm not sure kids hear that enough from us. They're afraid of 2 or 3 things: that we're going to be disappointed, that we're going to shame them, and that we're going to take away all the things they love, right? And so I really love when parents have open conversations with kids around, there are some things out there. There's drugs and alcohol. There is explicit content. There may be somebody who asks you to do something you don't want to do. If you see a student that's struggling, that says something like, I don't want to be here anymore, or you have a friend who's cutting or hurting themselves, like, I want to work with you on this. I'm not going to call the school. I'm not going to call that kid's parents, but we're going to work on this together, because I think it's important that you're part of that conversation. I think kids appreciate so much when we're like, I didn't live through this kind of stuff, and so I want to work with you, instead of, a lot of teenagers specifically have said to me, like, I love coming to your house and talking to you because I can't tell my parents this stuff. And I'm like, why? And they're like, they would freak out or they would get super mad. So I think as adults, if we can just keep in mind that they are amazing leaders of this, and as the gentleman in the audience said, do not try to keep up with the 13-year-old. She is 25,000 miles ahead of you. Sit down and really get to know, why do you like this? What are you using? Show me this video game. Show me what you like. And really getting to know what he or she likes. I think that's a huge part of the communication too, because so many of us are like, I don't understand Snapchat. TikTok is so stupid. Like, there is actually redeeming content. There's yoga on TikTok. There's recipes kids are cooking. There's engineering videos. Like, our kids are engaging in some pretty fantastic stuff. All they hear from us, I think, is nagging and sort of taking it away, and like sort of the negative messaging. And I think we could do better with the positive stuff.
Anybody else? I don't see any other questions, Katie. So I'd really like to thank you for your time. This has been really great information. Really very much appreciated. And I think our parents and families will find this to be a super valuable resource. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And again, sorry I couldn't make it, but I don't think you want what I have. So I appreciate you hosting, and hopefully I'm going to be back in the area in January, so I'll swing by to see everybody.
Sounds good. We hope you feel better.
All right, thanks so much. Have a great night.
Yep, you too.
Thanks. And thanks to the IT department and all the people running the sound and stuff too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Savitz.